So DIY estate planning, what can go wrong? When we talk about DIY estate planning, the starting point I usually talk about is what's out there when we look at DIY estate planning options. So what you'll typically see are a lot of companies that will say things like valid in all 50 states. Okay. First of all, validity is a pretty low bar. We want whatever is created to be valid, but ideally we want it to do a whole lot more than that. So we want to go beyond validity to meet your goals, to make things easier. And then what I find with a lot of these documents is typically because they're created for the purposes of being valid in all 50 states, that they may have a lot of stuff that may not necessarily be relevant to Alabama, or they might be missing some things that could actually be really helpful for the state of Alabama. But because they're often designed to be used in any number of states, sometimes they may be either missing something or may have a bunch of extra stuff in there that you don't really need. What we see a lot of times from DIY estate planning options is really cookie cutter stuff. A lot of people, when I meet with them, when they've tried that out before, they'll tell me you're limited on the different options that you could choose, the different scenarios that it could provide for. If you don't really feel like you are a cookie cutter person with a cookie cutter situation, then that may not really work out for you. In terms of problems that I see that come up with DIY planning is beyond the fact that a lot of times these are forms that are created by software or you get them out of a book or something like that. Is usually because there's not an attorney involved. They're very reliant on you following instructions or knowing how to carry out everything correctly. So usually they generate the documents and then you're responsible for making sure that it's signed properly and all the different things that need to be done properly happen. So in the case of a will, for example, you need to make sure that you sign in the right places, that all the other people sign in the right places, that the different stamps get on there. And sometimes I see that doesn't always really go correctly. There was one example during COVID that comes to mind. During COVID, people were dying very unexpectedly. So we saw a lot more DIY planning stuff come through the door that we were responsible for probating. So one example that comes to mind, we were given a will, and instead of actually signing it, the person creating the will just typewrote their name on the computer on the signature line, and it was in italics. It wasn't really a DocuSign e-signature, but kind of what you would see like that. It was just a computer printed signature there on the will. I was a little concerned of whether it would actually pass as a signature. So we sent it off to court. I figured, hey, we give it a shot. We'd send it off to court. I mean, with some creative legal arguments, perhaps you could argue that that was a signature. I mean, there is some precedent out there that you can make an X on a document and that can serve as your signature. So we figured we'd give it a shot. So we sent it to the court and it was rejected. So those are the types of things that we sometimes see with DIY estate planning, is that at some point something gets lost in translation and it's not actually done correctly. So on the trust side, when it comes to DIY estate planning, and generally I'm talking about the softwares out there that generate documents, we usually see a really important part of the trust creation process missing, and we call that asset alignment. Sometimes you'll hear people call that trust funding. I like to use the term asset alignment because in addition to funding, there can also be some other different things that we do. So when we talk about DIY trust creating software, we usually see that they're missing that asset alignment part. Sometimes they won't even tell people, hey, that's a really important part. So when we create a trust, not only do we create the trust, we've got to do some things with assets to make that trust actually work. So to make the assets and the trust work together. And most of the time when people are creating a trust, they're looking to avoid probate. So if we create the trust and then we don't do anything in the assets, it's very unlikely that that plan is actually going to create a situation that's going to avoid probate. And what's likely going to happen is there actually maybe another step in the process that actually makes it a little bit more complicated than just having a will alone. So asset alignment is really important. What I see a lot of these DIY things, like I said, sometimes they won't even tell people that you need to do that. And then sometimes they'll just kind of give you a general instruction manual. Hey, here's a few pages to let you know the things that you need to do with your assets to work together with the trust. That's not ideal. That's a really important part. I feel like a lot more care needs to go into that. So for us, at a minimum, what we're going to do is we're going to go through your assets specifically and give you specific recommendations on what you need to do with each of those assets to make them work together with the trust. So whether that be changing beneficiary designations, whether that be retitling that asset over to the trust, maybe shutting down a bank account. Maybe you got some bank accounts that you don't really need, and we can make things easier if you'll shut some of those down. We're going to give you specific instructions on what you need to do for each one of those assets. And then we do have other services available for people that are interested where we would stay with you through that process. We would give you additional guidance through that process. We will hold you accountable. So some people need that accountability component. So we will stay with you. We'll continue to have meetings to check on your progress and make sure you get it done. And then we'll actually verify that it's completed correctly. So as you go along and you're aligning your assets with your plan, we'll ask for paperwork so that we can take a look at it and verify that everything is done correctly.